Hi, everyone. Welcome back to What They Don't Say. This week, we are bringing you part 2 of our conversation with trauma therapist Cindie Henrie. If you haven't heard part 1 yet, I highly recommend going back and listening to that episode first. Otherwise, this one's not going to make a lot of sense because we pick up right where we left off. Last time, we were talking about the trauma triangle, which is how survivors of abuse can sometimes subconsciously slip between the roles of victim, rescuer, and perpetrator. But in this episode, we stay in that territory. We dive a little bit deeper into it about how trauma shapes our behavior, how it lives in the body, how anger can play a role in healing, and what that can all actually look like. Without further ado, let's get into part 2 of our conversation with Cindie Henrie. Your perpetrator is multifaceted.
Your perpetrator is multifaceted, so is your victim. And, a lot of times I think one of the things that we don't like to look at in victims is that because you're in the triangle, you have a predatory piece that's in there too. And that has to be looked at when you're working it through so that you can own all aspects of it and not react or respond from those places. And that's really important. And that's something that we all like to, again, you're a victim, you're good, you're a perpetrator, you're bad. We like to have that experience, and that's just not true. We're people.
That scares me.
I mean, we all have like the messed up thoughts, you know what I mean? We would never actually act on them. And that's the difference, right? I can sit here and be like, I hope my rapist is getting raped in prison right now. I can have those terrible thoughts because they obviously have manifests from this trauma that I went through. In hindsight, I don't want anyone to experience getting raped, even people who have done it themselves. But it's the same thing. I hate this cat that's sitting next to me and I just want to kick it through a window. I'm never going to actually act on that though.
Yeah, not acting on that impulse. Mm-hmm.
I have that self-control that I think can differentiate a good person versus a bad person.
Well, okay, so then what I would ask you is, have you ever done anything that, would be characterized as somebody who's doing something bad?
Oh, I'm sure. I mean, but
right.
It's that's to
but
my
what
extent,
degree, right?
It's oh, I lied. I lied to someone and I feel bad that I made up that lie to get out of something. Mm-hmm. You know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
I think there's obviously different levels to it. And I haven't been the perfectly nice person my whole life, obviously.
Have you ever seen somebody that you felt have you ever cussed somebody out because you felt that they were, making you a victim in some way? That's the element that you tap into,
right,
or,
yeah.
So that there's sides of it, right? And how much you might act it out is different. So it's not saying that you're a bad person. It's not saying that. It's saying that you also have that side. And when you're acting from that position, you're still trapped in the triangle and you're trapped in the trauma.
Mm-hmm.
So that is why you want to work, you want to come out of all three places so that you're not trapped in the trauma.
This is making a lot of sense for me because I frequently talk about how I've always had the capability of being an angry person, but before my assault, I didn't feel like I had a short temper. I didn't really feel like anger was an emotion that I felt frequently. And afterwards, anger was a much more frequent emotion, and the depth of the anger, a hot belly, deep-seated feeling of wanting to commit destruction. A little scary to admit that out loud, but I had never felt that before, and I have felt it after. And so I guess that's kind of the perpetrator part of the triangle that you're talking about.
Well, actually, I don't agree.
Oh,
I don't
okay.
agree.
You're wrong.
No, it's nothing. You're wrong. What it is that anger doesn't mean perpetrator, right? That's not. Okay. Those two aren't necessarily combined. Anger is an emotion that is a response to your boundaries being violated. Mm-hmm. And the more helpless that you feel, the more rage you're going to experience. And it was actually healthy for you to have the anger. It's an appropriate response to your power being taken away. Mm-hmm. So I wouldn't say that your anger is the issue. Okay. I would say when you feel like a victim and then you are justifying in your mind acting out to take action to hurt someone in some way or to be harmful in some way, that is the predatory part. That's the piece of that triangle. So I kind of look at anger, it can be, you can use your powers for good, or you can use your power. Here's your duality, right? You can use your powers for good or evil. I use Martin Luther King as an example. He was angry. He was angry. And what did he do with that anger? He channeled it in ways to be constructive, to take actions, to make change.
Right.
Right. So anger is an emotion that inspires action. So then it's like, how do I channel that anger in a way that is constructive, that genuinely helps me process and deal with that anger and assume power in a positive way? What are the ways that I can take power back in a constructive way? So a little bit, two different things.
Okay, that makes me feel
Okay.
better.
Wait.
Yeah, because I think that I want people, I never, like victims, you need to be able to be mad. A lot of times we suppress our anger and we say, oh, that's bad. It equals the perpetrator. So I'm really glad you brought that up. But no, that's actually not true. The anger is an appropriate emotion.
Okay, wait. I have one for you.
I love this. I have a question.
Okay, so
I love talking to you guys. It's so fun.
We love talking to you.
you.
You guys are so great. I just love this.
So I started doing MMA in college, like a couple years after I was assaulted.
Okay.
And like I just like wanted to learn how to fight. Like I started doing jujitsu. I mean, like I boxed in high
Good for
school.
you.
Like
Good
I
for you.
always
Okay.
liked doing that. One of the things that made it so much fun was that like I would be fighting men, especially men that were bigger than me, and I liked knowing that I could hurt them and like having that power when I was, obviously like I'm in a gym, like I'm not actually gonna like, break their arm, but I could. And I knew I had that power. What about that? Is that like the predatory part
So
of
think about what
triangle?
you're talking about. I'm going into a controlled situation. I'm reenacting some element of this, but it's controlled and contained and there's consent on both ends.
I guess that's true.
Is that predatory?
No.
No. What that is it's a way to funnel the anger and channel the anger and empower you. So you were able to feel, and here's what was really great about that. So I'm going to kind of introduce this whole other idea. One of the things that I do is what's called sensory motor psychotherapy. Thank you, Pat Ogden, for developing this because this has been such a game changer. Trauma is in your body. When we are traumatized, we want to avoid our bodies, so we like to be in this intellectual space. We disconnect and detach and unhook from our experience, right? So in trauma treatment, you have to rehook to it. The more that you're in a passive state or a submit state during an assault, the more PTSD often gets developed, right? There's lots of elements that have how intense the PTSD develops and why. But the more passive you are, the more you have to submit, the more you're going to feel the PTSD in general, as a general kind of thing. And in animal defenses that are active, like you can run away, you can fight, you're going to freeze with alertness and paying attention so that you can know what kind of action to take. Those are all animal actions that are action oriented. And so when you shift your body into a fight response, you're actually countering the passive response or the submit response. The one where you weren't able to do something. Now you're able to do something and that takes power back in your body and helps relieve the PTSD. That actually is one of the best treatments with PTSD is shifting it in your body, but you have to follow what it is in your body. So when I do that kind of work somatically, I want to follow your body and where the impulses are so that I know what your body's kind of needing and I can help you complete the action that you weren't able to do. So if in a situation you kind of had to submit and be, frozen or not, or just kind of like limp, but the other instinct in your body is to push them off or to punch them, to be able to then do pushing or punching while you're in that kind of working it through, it's completing something your body couldn't complete. And that helps relieve the PTSD. So what you're doing in that situation is actually that. And that's fantastic. Good for you. Now, I'll tell you, in my assault, I kept trying to go back to self-defense courses. And I would go and drop out, go and drop out, go and drop out, go and drop out. I couldn't understand why until I figured out that had I done those actions, I might have not survived the assault.
Oh.
Ooh, yeah,
Right.
yeah,
And that's why I couldn't handle doing the self-defense classes.
yeah. I mean, that makes a lot
Uh-huh.
of sense because, a lot of people are scared to fight back because if they do, it could get even more violent.
And that's the thing is our bodies have the knowledge.
Hmm.
So the part of your brain that's a thinking brain isn't the one that's taking over in the middle of an assault. It's
Right.
actually the other areas of your brain, the lower brain parts. And that's good because your midbrain is responding to what the emotion is, and then your lower brain is responding to whatever action needs to be happening from your sensory input. So like what you're seeing, what you're hearing, what you're feeling, sensory wise. You're instinctually reading somebody on a regular basis. So your body has a response to what they're reading, the micro expressions. And so your body's going to go, okay, don't fight because that's actually going to make this more violent or worse. Your body decides that, and then your brain may actually think something. So trust your body instincts because those are going to be the things that help you the most.
Yeah.
Right.
Me and Shannon have tried to talk a lot about that idea of like trusting your body. I know after my assault, like I didn't understand what had just happened, but my
Hmm.
body knew. Body was like freaking out and I felt like awful and like but I couldn't put words to it. I could not my brain couldn't comprehend what happened, but my body knew. It was like a gut check. And
Hmm.
when I did that gut check, I was like something is not good here, something is not okay here. And then it wasn't until later when I was like in therapy talking about the experience, my therapist had to sit there and be like, hey, that is rape.
Hmm.
And I laughed because I was like, what? And he was like, that's,
Exactly.
yeah, like that's why your body was freaking out. It knew what had happened.
Right.
And but I had never learned about what rape was
Hmm.
because we don't talk about consent. We don't have these conversations in our education and also just like in our lives as, young children and going through middle school and high school. And so then you go to college where you have a much higher risk for this happening and then it does and you're like, "What? No one ever told me what this was, what it means, like how it happens." And so then you're just like confused. But your body knows.
Was this the same perpetrator that you guys were talking about earlier? Okay.
Yes.
So one of the things that I was kind of hearing when you were describing certain things is that he was creating this you're special, we're friends, like we help each other kind of situation. Part of his need was for you to believe that it was consent. He tells himself you're consenting.
Yeah.
That's what I would say on the perpetrator side, is that his belief system is that you're consenting. So what happens in you is that you're taking in confusion because your body is not lining up with what you're thinking. Because why would my friend or this person who I trust, that my family trusts,
Hmm.
do something so horrible to me? I can't comprehend that. But your body's like, "Er, something's wrong. Because your body's not responding from that cognitive place. It's
Hmm.
responding from the lower brain place, which is why it's like you can listen to and hear your body. Your body has that wisdom. I've literally done sensory motor work with people where they were drugged and assaulted and don't have memory, but they can go through and their body actually has the whole memory. And so they figured out what had happened when they were drugged through their bodies. I've had
Wow.
several incidents of that. And that's how the only way that they could process that through. Had we not had the sensory motor piece, if we didn't have that piece, that would not have probably been addressed. And then they'd still be kind of cycling in the assaults.
Wow. So that's
Hmm.
what the victim is experiencing. Is the perpetrator experiencing denial? Are they experiencing any confusion in their thoughts the same way that the victim is?
It's funny. When you listen to perpetrators talk about their crimes, it's amazing how they rationalize and justify things. I've heard some of the most astounding rationalizations and justifications for different actions that they've taken. They genuinely will believe that it's fine. Sometimes they have remorse, sometimes they know it's not fine, but they can't stop.
That's the compulsion. side of it.
Yeah, that's the compulsion side of it. It's a really powerful, complex thing. It's kind of on a similar lines of domestic violence. Perpetrators may know and in the anger responses that what they're doing is not okay, but they continue to do it over and over. They can't stop. And it's because the strong need for power, that
Right.
they feel disempowered, and so they need to have power. The psychology beneath that is the thing that is so challenging.
Right. Yeah. I always bring up the show Big Little Lies. Have you watched that, Cindy?
I may have seen it a while ago. I don't really remember it though, to be
Okay.
honest.
Because it was a book too, but I bring it up because it's about a lot of different things, and it's about like all these rich families. It's supposed to take place in like Monterey, California. The kind of main part of it is that like there's this one wealthy family, both parents are beautiful and successful, but like we come to learn that the husband is very abusive. But on the outside, the relationship looks perfect. He's like abusive to his wife, but he also has assaulted other women who then like end up coming into this circle. And it's obviously very dramatic. It's a very good show. But it's interesting because the husband, the perpetrator, you see him through all these different sides throughout the whole show, right? Like he's an amazing father and he's like a good person to his friends, right? So you like see this like human side of him. He only wants other people to see. You see that he's like genuinely a good father. But then behind closed doors, he's beating up his wife. But right after he beats her up, he starts crying and apologizing. And like he has immediate remorse, but he can't stop himself.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting to watch that. And I'm sure like if you rewatch it as a person like in the space that you're in, I think it would be interesting because it does kind of show all these different sides of perpetrators and then like how some of them really genuinely know that what they're doing is wrong, but they cannot control those compulsions.
When you're describing that, it also sounds like a narcissistic type of perpetrator. Like everything has to look a certain way, kind to people who have more distance from you, but the people who are closest are the ones who get the abuse. So that sounds like a narcissistic element as well. And some of the remorse in the narcissistic element is very self-centered. So that's not other-centered, it's self-centered. It's about them and making themselves feel better. But there is a cycle. I mean, we used to describe the perpetrator cycle. There is a cycle to abuse. And so there's kind of this whole, you feel that something happens, you feel bad, you feel like you don't have power, you start fantasizing, then you start planning, then you act out, then you feel remorse, you restabilize, the cycle happens again. So that's kind of the abuse cycle. So even what you're seeing in that show is showing the cycle.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Especially
Right.
because like he typically would lash out when he felt like he wasn't in control. And like his wife was a very successful lawyer who like put her career on hold for the kids and things like that, and then decided to like get back into like the legal world. And when she started doing that and like taking more time away from the kids and like focusing more on her career, that's when like the abuse would start to escalate. So he like clearly felt like he was losing that sense of power and had to like regain it somehow.
Well, you know what? You're also bringing up an interesting point that one of the things that I've seen is we love to make victims out to be these like really like wussy, weak, incapable, can't stand up for yourself. Women who are battered, they're so like wussy, blah, blah, blah. No, they're not. That's actually not true. A lot of times women who are victims of domestic violence or sexual assault, that may not be true at all. A lot of them are feisty and really powerful. And typically the people that I do have private practice. So, but a lot of times the domestic violence people who come in are really career oriented women who are so good in their careers and, are powerhouses in so many ways. And that's actually, but, so it's like, give them housing, give them this. And it's like, no, they already have it. They may already have it. In fact, it might be theirs.
Right.
Like the housing might be theirs, and that's not the solution to give them housing. Like so it's getting the perpetrator out of their house, things like that. So we want to see sort of a victim is weak or so fragile, and a perpetrator is so abusive and so strong, and that's often not the case.
Yeah.
It can actually be the opposite, or it may not, maybe too strong people.
The narrative is skewed from what we've been told.
It is skewed often, but imagine because that's so ingrained in our psyche, how does that affect police? How does that affect, lawyers? How does that affect juries? when they see people and they see real survivors or real victims trying to take, action to protect themselves legally, that's not necessarily the situation. So, are you a sympathetic victim? I mean, imagine what that means.
And this is a cheesy transition. This is so cheesy. But I'm thinking, you're making me think about power and the way that things are portrayed in like media, which is then bringing me to Hollywood, which then reminds me that you have experience in these spaces. Within the past few years, there's been all these big names that are starting to come out. Diddy, Harvey
Yeah.
Weinstein, Jay-Z. How is, like, what is sexual violence like behind the curtain in Hollywood in these spaces? Is there anything that's sneaky or odd compared to what I would say just civilian sexual violence?
I will say that a lot of Hollywood sexual perpetration has been a really big element of it. There are sex rings within those groups. So like with P. Diddy, you were seeing the sex ring element. There's kind of a large group of people involved in like a black magic cult groups. There's large black magic cult groups in Hollywood. Yeah. And that can be right. And that's a big part of that. It's sort of like you can gain, the idea is you can gain a lot of power through fear and, somebody's experience of fear. And it's an interesting dynamic. There's a lot of trafficking that happens through like those industries because you've got people going, to different states. It's really easy to traffic music stars or people in television. There's a lot of pedophilia that can happen in that. So I'm glad it's finally starting to come out. When I was working with the kids on the streets, I was hearing about different things that were happening, encountering like different pedophilic sex rings and things like that were, abusing some of the kids on the streets, but also the kids who were coming from really wealthy homes. Some of this stuff even happens in the school. So, I mean, for the, that's the kid side, right? But, Hollywood loves youth. And so, yeah, there's actually a lot of perpetration that's happening that is more organized. Or just, if you want to be able to make this music, yeah, you're fantastic, you're amazing, you're an exceptionally talented artist. But in order to, are you going to engage in some sort of, sexual something with me in order for me to produce?
Okay.
That happens a lot. Those kinds of things do happen a lot. The things that you're hearing about stars starting to come forward about their experiences in Hollywood, good for them.
Yeah.
Good for you guys speaking up and saying that. It goes pretty deep. It goes pretty deep. I mean, like Hollywood, you've got the huge like Scientology building. There's like huge like groups that are there, other organizations that are there that, are more cult-like. And there's a lot of that for Hollywood and there's big money there. So that also means organized crime. And I mean, I don't want to get too far into that because that sounds like the rabbit hole, but that's all, I think that's always been true in Hollywood, that there's been that kind of organization and stuff. Some of the ruthlessness that happens. Yeah.
Because it's a hub for media and there's a lot of money, it enables these sort of like groups as well as more organized sex rings and things like that.
Yeah, because there's like, I mean, we've been hearing about groups that are actually trafficking through different places and big names who are trafficking people from other countries. That's happened. That's a big one that's happening in modeling industries. They bring models from other countries that are, young teen girls or teens, and then they're sexually assaulted. But they have to, it's like in order to be able to get this contract, you're going to be sexually assaulted repeatedly, but then
Then we'll give you the
make big
contract.
money off of you, or you're going to be a model for my, brand. But like some people, and I'm not going to name names, so some people have like independent apartments, Beverly Hills or whatever, and then they bring them in and rape them in those apartments, under the guise of work. There's a lot of this kind of stuff that's going on. Yeah. I've been involved in legal cases like that against some big name people, and they're trafficking also from other countries. And I've heard of a lot of rings with the music industry that is trafficking through multiple cities where it's easier to do so and stuff like that.
Thank you.
Yeah,
for sharing that.
it's tricky stuff. Yeah, because for me, trafficking isn't just pimping and prostitution. It's a lot more than that. And so it encompasses a lot of this kind of stuff as well. Usually when people talk about trafficking, they're talking more about the prostitution.
Different aspects
It's
of
different.
it.
Yeah, that's very different. Yeah, that kind of stuff is really different. That literal human trafficking.
Human trafficking is so much more prevalent than we think it is. And, like we see
Hmm.
like posters for it in bathrooms and things like that. But then like we don't really think about it and we don't really think about what that looks like. And I was wondering if you could give a little insight into like what human trafficking actually manifests as around us.
Most likely, somebody who's being trafficked, you're not going to know. If you run into them in a grocery store, you're not going to know that that's what's happening. Usually, there's the psychological breakdown that happens within the first 72 hours. It's pretty quick. And then there's an enslavement that's happening. So, really, what you're talking about is enslavement of people. But it's like you are enslaved in a way that you can actually be out in public and you're not going to turn over your person, right? So, that's true of prostitutes with pimps, too. They get that same brainwashing effect that happens on them, and what it is there's an initial sort of like, how your perpetrators were like building that special relationship. And then there's a sudden violent sexual assault after that. And then there's brutality. And then there's a flip to the love bombing again. And so that combination is a quick way that gains control over someone. In that kind of human trafficking, you've got somebody who's like taking care of your house. They're your sex slave. They may be pimped out to other people. You may be passing them around to your friends. Other people may be paying for them. They may be, kind of acting as quote unquote spies, for like kind of listening in on conversations, to give you new information that might help your business, whatever. So it's a little bit more multifaceted. In really dark things, it may actually be even more than that. They may commit criminal acts for you. It's all in kind of what you are, doing. One of the things that's more known is in Super Bowl Sundays, there's a huge trade of slaves. So like I want to have a different person and we're going to trade in these areas. So you're going to take mine, I'm going to take yours. We're just doing trading of our people and gaining control over them and having the same thing going on. So, and at some point you become so used to being trafficked that you defend, oftentimes they'll defend their perpetrators because you have an effect of you fall in love with your perpetrator and you see them as the one you need to protect and you have sympathy towards them. That's called Stockholm Syndrome.
That's what I was thinking.
It's a very strong lock. It's a very, very strong bond that is far stronger than like a healthy bond. And so it's very difficult to break. And that can last for years and years. That can last for a lifetime.
Wow.
So it's pretty tough. I mean, I think that's some of what you were saying with Jeffrey Epstein. They touched on some of stuff, right? Like this is the way that they got the girls in. Here's the way that you get, kind of started to do the perpetration, but then they're brought to other islands where there's, more of the prostitution happening. That's kind of similar stuff that maybe that kind of goes on in some of these bigger industries.
This might be a really dumb question. But
there is no dumb question. There's no such thing as a dumb question. Questions are good.
How do you survive that and get out of that? If you're
in it?
Yeah, because I mean, you've worked with survivors of human trafficking. When you get so far deep that you are experiencing like Stockholm syndrome, like, is there a way that you can get out and survive that?
Yeah, you can get out. Kind of depends on the situation and how much control somebody has. I've worked with a lot of people who were victims in it, and like sometimes they're cast out by their perpetrators. And if you're cast out, then you're kind of free, but you don't want to be free. Kind of like so used to being controlled that you don't necessarily want to be free. And so when you're in therapy, it's like kind of working through the trauma of that, working through the brainwashing, kind of educating. But it's a lot of work. I mean, it's definitely challenging. Working with different parts of you to kind of heal through that, right? So some people talk about internal family systems work where it's like, this angry part, this part of you that liked it, this part of you that didn't. Let's have this conversation between those two parts and what happens there. So there's some of this kind of stuff of different sides of you interfacing with each other and trying to understand it from that level. But it takes time and you have to work through the grief. And so a lot of times you have to grieve your perpetrator. And I think that's true of a lot of people. A lot of people have deeper, closer relationships with that perpetrator and you have to grieve that relationship and the break of trust and the betrayal. So it's just a deeper level of that.
And there's someone in my life who was assaulted by someone for a really long time and he passed away. a couple years ago, and they were separated for a long time, before his passing. But it was such a weird or interesting thing to see, of like grieving the abuser, because you think like, oh, fuck the abuser, he should die, like that's kind of what a lot of people think it would look like, but it's much deeper. And because of that relationship that they built, they were able to do all of that. But I can't imagine, for people who have gone through that, I cannot imagine trying to unravel that.
Yeah, that same attachment happens with domestic violence as well. That also happens in kidnapping cases. Gangs, that happens in gangs. There's those similar dynamics. Yeah, I think like if you look at Charles Manson, one of the reasons why Charles Manson was able to create his cult group was he was trained by the pimps in prison. The pimps taught him how to create that loyalty, how to create that Stockholm syndrome bond.
My only like knowledge of like the Manson group was just watching Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. But even in that movie you can see that, and it's really weird.
Yeah, you see the brainwashing.
Yeah.
Right, and like the sex with the cult leader.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah.
And it's interesting because we actually like to have a lot of denial about cults right now. And yet we have so many cults.
See, I don't even.
There's so many cults that are
like,
happening. It's so interesting.
I know that we don't have a whole lot of time left, but can you talk to us a little bit about cults?
Yeah, typically cults use brainwashing, isolation. It's kind of the same dynamics as abuse, right? Isolate you from, people that might try to talk you out of it or get you out or be support. And then there's usually sex involved, and compromising sex is often a part of it. Like you may be sleeping with the leader, you may be young, sleeping with older people, and then it's God's will,
Right, of course.
right? And then they get you believing these things that are bizarre, but because of this phenomenon of like kind of idolizing this person, you just follow whatever they say, because you now see them as that sort of deity person. So they usually get your wealth, they usually get your money. They'll tell you to live with them, with their groups a lot of times, or they won't. And, some cults you live at home and you just attend the cult meetings. Right. And then they give them large sums of money. There's self-help cults. There's, cults that are religious based. There's political ones. We see people who, blindly follow different political leaders that, like Hitler is a great example. He had a great way of kind of instilling a cult like mentality. Some people talk about Trump that way. I don't want to, go politics for one side or another, but I think for some people, you can look at that and just look at a cult like following. Not everybody who follows Trump is a cult, is feeling that way, but there's a group that really is.
Yeah.
That really follows the cult in a cult way versus like, I don't think that Joe Biden had like a cult kind of person, leader persona, right? The charisma and the abusiveness is actually kind of more what creates the cult leaders. And they, there's often like this idea of like, dying and stuff like that and having to defend and weaponize. But yeah, there's a lot of cults in the United States. I was trying to think of there's a whole thing on the ways in which cults take control of people. And there's like thought control, and it's like you really can't think of things in a different way. There's usually some element of like starvation or deprivation that's involved. The sexual pieces with leaders, isolating from other people, creating an us versus them. It's a lot of what's called thought control. But the thing that is also kind of interesting is that media is a huge way of thought control as well.
Right.
And so it's like, well, I belong to this group and this is what they think, and so therefore I believe that. Where we're not taught critical thinking anymore.
Yeah.
And critical thinking is really important, but we're not taught to critically think. Me personally, I'm a Democrat, me personally, but I don't like go, oh, Republicans are wrong and this is terrible. You guys are horrible humans. I believe that we're all wanting good things for the country. It's just that we have different viewpoints of what may be useful, right?
Right.
But there are a lot of things that I absolutely do not agree with in the Democratic Party that I think Republicans are dead on with. And I'm not going to get into that, but as a liberal, talking to other liberals, if I say some of those things because of other things that I've been exposed to, right? They'll be like, oh, if I ever repeated that, I would just be cut out of my friend group. right? And it's like,
Yeah.
well, if you're giving factual information, that might be more useful, but it's critical thinking.
Right.
But it's like if I critically think and other people know that I'm thinking critically, then I'm not loyal to my group. That something's wrong there.
Yeah, and you should be allowed to disagree. Lauren and I have had conversations about this too, where it's like it's okay to have like different points of view, and that's what's supposed to be what's so great about America in general, is that we should be allowed to have different backgrounds and believe different things, and like, be liberal but maybe not agree with everything, and vice versa. And so I love that you brought that up.
Cindie, we could talk to you forever and ever and ever on so many different things. But yeah, we appreciate you so much for taking the time.
Oh,
and
you
thank
guys,
so
you guys
much
are
for being here.
awesome. I really enjoyed this. I totally would love to do this again. I could do this forever. I love this. And my hope is that that some of this content and this information is helpful for people who are dealing with different things. That's my hope, is that I hope that just some of this has really sparked something in people and they're like, oh, that was really helpful to hear, that kind of thing.
Absolutely. Well, I know it sparked a lot in me and Shannon already. So
Good.
it's already had an
Good.
impact.
100%.
Good. Oh, that's so great, you guys. I'm really honored. I'm really honored you guys had me on. I love that you guys are doing this. This is, remember we're talking about anger and the power of anger. You guys channeled your anger into doing this podcast.
Yeah,
Think of it that way.
Yeah.
That's where you're taking your power back in your voices.
Yeah.
That is
So good for you guys for doing this. Good.
Thank you.
Thank you so
Yeah.
much, Cindie.
It's been my pleasure.
Thank you guys so much for listening to today's episode. We love you guys so much. If you want to connect with us on socials, everything is What They Don't Say official. If you want to send us an email, whether you have an episode idea, you want to volunteer someone to be on the show, our email is whattheydon'tsaythepodcast@gmail.com. We love you guys so much. We hope you have a great rest of your week. We'll catch you on the flip side, and cheers.
Cheers.
Cheers.